I was recently at my local BMV, which is a big used book chain in Toronto, and I made the mistake of going into the used comic book section, which they have a very big one at the Annex location if you walk all the way to the top floor, and looking through alphabetically the image titles, I came across a hardcover of Kirkman, McFarlane's, Otley's, Capullo, Haunt, the Immortal Edition, Book 1. I mean, they didn't need to put the book 1 because, as we'll get into it, this is the only hardcover version of this. But I picked it up for a number of reasons. Haunt was always something that, like, I knew of when it was happening, the idea that Kirkman and McFarlane were coming together and they're making a comic, but I never really had any interest in it because it just looked like a Spawn ripoff. But the price was right, it was used, it was like 1/3 of its cover price, and I picked it up because when would I see that ever again? I mostly picked it up because I'm a huge Robert Kirkman fan. Now, I followed Robert Kirkman's books from the beginning. I actually picked up the first trade of Battle Pope when it came out, just because I love the artwork by Tony Moore and the concept of Battle Pope, ooh, sacrilegious! And I followed his work when he went into Invincible, which was an amazing superhero series and only recently started getting adaptations on Amazon Prime in an animated form. I highly recommend checking out the comics if you haven't. They're one of the greatest superhero comics ever written in one kind of, compressed run from mostly the same artist and entirely the same writing team. And he kind of did a lot of stuff, and I fell off as he got into The Walking Dead, really deep into it. I was a big supporter early on, but it's something that I kind of fell off of because I really didn't feel like it was going anywhere. And also, it got too popular. I don't want to have anything to do with that once it gets popular. And so I picked up a few of his newer things like Fire Force, and, I got back into the Kirkman vibe. You can find all of his books at libraries. Like, they bought all the Robert Kirkman stuff because he did image titles. They were very available. And while some are better than others, there is a passion there I really appreciate. I really started to like him even more as a fan. In the Fire Force single issues, he actually does commentary where they just kind of talk through the issue beat by beat. And I love that kind of stuff. And it could only come from a fan. So Haunt, decided to pick it up. Didn't have many big expectations. But I mostly went for it when I saw how much of a kind of focal point it was for all of these creators. So you see from the first page here, Todd McFarlane and Robert Kirkman, they created it. Now, what did Todd McFarlane actually do for this? Well, we're about to find out. So writer Robert Kirkman, he did all of the issues that were included in this. Layouts, Greg Capullo. Now, Greg Capullo is probably most well known for working on Spawn. He also did a legendary run of Batman that was written by Scott Snyder. But what really caught my attention was Ryan Ottley doing pencils. Ryan Ottley would go on to be the main artist on Invincible, basically doing the entire run once the usual Robert Kirkman kind of thresher of the original artist couldn't keep up with the pace of a monthly title. Robert Kirkman firmly believes that you need to release something every month, no delays, because that way, that's how you can make an audience and keep an audience. And so Ryan Ottley was the guy that did the principal run, and I actually really, really like his art. So when I saw his name there, as well as Greg Capullo, who I really like, but also seemed representative of me, of a kind of image Spawn style that I'm not a big fan of. Now, I don't want to be sacrilegious here, but I'm not a big fan of Spawn now. Of course, I was a huge fan of Spawn when the Image books started. Now, I was a little bit too young to really get involved in it, but I was aware of what Image was. And if people don't know, real quick rundown, Image was formed by a bunch of artists that were kind of superstars in the Marvel stable, and they went off and started their own company where they would do creator-owned books under the Image banner, and it was a phenomenon. It was kind of one of the, Jenga blocks that was pulled out and collapsed the comic book industry because it led to a massive speculator boom, but that was also involved with things like the death of Superman. And another thing about Image books was they were really known for style over substance. Speaking of Robert Kirkman believing that you needed a monthly book to keep an audience, Image books were famous for not meeting their street dates. Because all these artists were their own boss, they had difficulty, even with all the fame, the attention that they were having, of writing and drawing their own books and getting them on time. So Robert Kirkman, who at this point, I believe he had started Invincible. It was an Image title. I don't know if he had done The Walking Dead yet. Teamed up with Todd McFarlane, probably the most famous of the Image guys. Now, you have people like Rob Liefeld or Jim Lee, but, Todd McFarlane, I feel like, is the one that was the superstar, the one that was always on camera doing interviews. And so him coming with Robert Kirkman, who, you know, was a self-avowed super fan of comic books, should have had more interest. Now, from what research I could do, there's not much written about Haunt out there. This was a big selling title just on Buzz, and it did last past this. I believe so this is 2 trades if you're reading them in softcover, and you also have 2 more trades, but Robert Kirkman wasn't involved, and another writer took over that I'm not that big a fan of, so I don't think I'll be going past what's in this hardcover, which, you know, I read, and I'll say right off the top, I very much enjoyed, but it is mostly something I approach as a curiosity piece. So you have McFarlane here doing the covers. Wow, Haunt looks kind of like another superhero that maybe McFarlane made his fame on, a spider who perhaps is a man. Yeah, something like that. I mean, a lot of the Image guys' books, their characters looked very familiar to other stuff they had worked on or were inspired by. Nothing wrong with that, as long as they make really interesting stories. And when you see right here from the get-go, it's like, oh, wow, this is a guy who's a prostitute, and dun dun dun, he's a priest. Now, this is like pure Image, like, oh man, these ain't your daddy's comic books, which would usually kind of be a turnoff for me. But I was interested in this just because of, you know, Robert Kirkman doing his things and Ryan Ottley doing the art. And it's kind of not really in his style, which makes a lot of sense when you realize that Greg Capullo did the layout. So for people that aren't familiar with how artwork and comics can be broken down, to kind of save on time, layouts of like where characters are going to be or how the panel layout will be done, it's sometimes done by the writer, sometimes not, and sometimes it's actually done by another artist who does that kind of heavy lifting, who interprets the script. Now, I'm not sure how Robert Kirkman writes his scripts at this point, if he does it in the Marvel method, if it's just a plot synopsis that the artists have to interpret, or it's more of a like panel by panel thing, but like these panel layouts are pure Greg Capullo. Like you read his Spawn work, you read his Batman work, and it's all these kind of like very edgy or even just very Image-like stuff. Now the problem with these kind of like very pose-heavy things is that I find that the action flow doesn't really work that well. Like if you read a lot of those Image books, someone like Rob Liefeld, while, you know, his art has been made fun of a lot, it really works in kind of like those splash pages, but doesn't really work all the time, most of the time, in a storytelling sense, especially when it comes to action. But I feel because Kirkman is writing, and he may be doing a little bit more specific than you expect, that you get a little bit more of a flow of action here that is then teamed up with Capullo's layouts, and then Ottley doing it over. And I think it's actually a really good mix. Now, this is the, I believe this was published in the late 2011. You do have like very dark colors. Like it's violent for the sake of violence. Sometimes there seems to be weird storytelling stuff that's skipped over. But the basic premise of this book, which I know I've been talking about for a while now without ever getting into, is that the priest brother is a super spy and he gets killed on the mission. And then the super spy brother somehow gets a symbiotic relationship with the priest. So then his ectoplasm can form around him to make Haunt. So very Spawn-like, very Firestar, the DC hero, which were like 2 characters inside of each other. Nothing really original here, but it's just kind of the style and the way that it's done that would lead to interest. Very violent, as you can see. You know, you're pushing it to the limit. Very Spider-Man style posing. You know, what it reminds me, especially in these early issues, is Tim Vigil's Faust, which was a very kind of infamous outlaw comic, which was about pushing things as far as they could go, that the storytelling was very wacky and convoluted, but represented a very specific thing. And Faust, you can see in Spawn, I don't know if Todd McFarlane's ever discussed of how influenced he was by it, but this seems like the next level over. And what's really fascinating reading this book throughout is that you get the sense that Robert Kirkman is trying to figure out what this series is going to be. Will it just be a vigilante going out killing bad guys thing? Is it going to be more grounded with the hero being the supernatural thing in the center of it? And it never quite figures it out. Like, Haunt never really has a villain that he can face off against in these issues, which is also a complaint that I have of, like, you know, Image or even modern day comics, decompressed storytelling, where one issue doesn't necessarily mean a satisfying package, that you need to read them in 5-issue stints. But, you know, I'm going to be honest, I thought this would be kind of drudgery going through, but I had fun with this. When you can read it straight through and you feel Robert Kirkman figuring it out, Greg Capullo's, you know, really dynamic layouts and Ryan Ottley's kind of cartoonishly realistic art over it. And then you get that kind of blast of, look how violent this panel is. Like, this is so like, look what we can do. Almost kind of like Garth Ennis, Steve Dillon, this like panel reminds me of. I mean, this will only ever be a novelty. I wouldn't recommend people like rush out and buy them, but I know that like if you're going through like dollar bins, you are guaranteed to find issues of Haunt in there because they printed a lot of them and they were very popular. Oh, look, you have a little bit of, risque nudity here. I'm going to hide it just in case any eyes that are too innocent will see. So a problem that happens as you read through, this is so ridiculous, as you go through this, is that like they're trying to figure out like what the limits of Haunt are. They want to give him a power set, but then you always have the same villain that keeps coming back. And they really needed to build up a rogues gallery, and like I think this is 12 issues, and they never quite do it. And they keep kind of changing the status quo every few issues. I mean, you have kind of undead villains that show up. Oh, and I didn't even mention, so the shot in the arm is that Greg Capullo takes over completely the art, I think in issue 7. So you get the layout, and then you have the more kind of like jagged art that's Greg Capullo's style versus Ryan Ottley's, semi-realistic cartoony style. Like, this is such a Spawn style panel, but with a little bit more of, I would say, a storytelling flow that you would see in Spawn. Even though, again, I'm not a Spawn expert, I've read issues here or there, it was very popular, and that's something that I found lacking, a lot of style versus substance, which, I mean, this is all style, but there's a little bit of substance in here as well, and there's kind of a new, Haunt will be working for a government agency. Look at these guns. Like, Spawn would always do this, is hold the guns. I think I forgot to mention, it was on that title page, but Todd McFarlane did the inks on this as well. But Haunt, basically forgotten now. It went, there's a Carnage coming here. It went past this. Nobody holds it in very high regard, but I love novelty books. Like, look at this. It's kind of like a skin-like texture on the back here. I love novelty books published in hardcover, so this was an easy pickup for me, and I was happy to talk about it as the kind of midpoint between kind of Robert Kirkman's love for these type of comics before defining his own style, and Image kind of going away. I mean, Todd McFarlane is one of the Image guys that continues to do Spawn, which seems to be still very popular, so he's still holding the torch for that. But again, I haven't read it in a very long time. But speaking of Image people that are still doing their thing, I wanted to use this as an excuse for a sneak attack, for me to talk about the Savage Dragon. Now, this was one of the Image comics that I picked up when I was a kid, and I loved it. I think that out of all those Image guys, Eric Larson is the one guy who probably loves comics the most, especially like Silver Age and Bronze Age comics, and that Savage Dragon is one of those comics that he is still writing and drawing himself. And so what I'm holding in my hands here is the Ultimate Collection, Volume 2. For a comic that, like, exists to this day, there's hundreds of issues. These have never been properly collected in hardcovers. So Eric Larson put out kind of big, thick, essential black and white trade paperbacks that are, like, on newspaper print. You can even get them up to basically where he is now. And they're cheap. They're sometimes hard to find, but they're not the like best way to read the Savage Dragon. This is a very colorful book, and Eric Larson in interviews has said that, the black and white stuff really gets lost, especially in the way that Eric Larson loves to have like multiple stories running at once, sometimes intercutting scenes with like just a couple of pages in one scene, and then you'll jump to another. And that's mostly because he always has like 30 things he's juggling at once, and that I believe, according to him, he didn't script these out, so he's kind of making it up as he goes along. So there's a real kind of all-over-the-place feel to it that I love, and this is a comic that runs in real time. So if you start at the beginning and go to now, it's actually happening in the present, which I can't think of another kind of mainstream-ish superhero book that does that, because none of it existed as long as Savage Dragon. So if you want the kind of Image vibe of that 90s, but you find it evolved, and I think that it works the best in this form. If you're not aware of Savage Dragon, He is a dragon man that woke up in a flaming field, does not know where he is or where he came from, joins the Chicago Police Department, and fights a lot of bad guys, sometimes killing them. This is a very violent comic book, but because it is all in continuity, there's not really any... there are kind of some reboots, but then he usually goes back on it. You stay with these characters. It's super fun. Erik Larsen is a older man, so you will see some, I want to say, older man opinions in newer issues of Savage Dragon, but it's like hanging out with your grandfather. And here is a youngerish guy. I think he was actually one of the older guys at Image at the time of this publication, who is just doing what he's always wanted to do and publish superhero comics that he has complete control over. I love the Star guy. He's just kind of a Spider-Man ripoff. I mean, out of all the guys that were ripping off other heroes, Erik Larsen probably, or villains, does it the most shamelessly. Like, there's like a Dr. Octopus guy that shows up. There's a Dr. Doom guy that's like the main villain in these comics. But then you also have like really great storytelling. For example, there's an issue here where there's a knockout, drag down fight between Savage Dragon and a supernatural foe, while at the same time you have a human being being attacked by a superpowered villain. And so you kind of intercut both of them, of a normal man fighting a supervillain while normal people try to fight. Actually, Savage Dragon gets possessed by a leech here and is killing a bunch of people. So lots of stuff, lots of stakes. If you like superhero books and want to see them at their maximalist, check out Savage Dragon. The Ultimate Collection are finally in print. You can get Volume 1, Volume 2. Buy them because I want more of these to be published. I actually own all the black and white versions, but like, it's night and day reading them. And if you want to get into Savage Dragon without having to buy a hardcover, which also comes with a lot of amazing extras and commentary at the end, go to a dollar bin. You will find probably the first 12 issues very easily, because there was like millions and millions of them printed, and now they go for nothing. So thanks very much for watching. Oh, it's kind of boring. There's nothing on screen. If you want more of me talking comic books in a probably less rambling way than I do here, check out the Very Fine Comic Book Podcast. It's a comic book podcast I do every week with Mike Wood, a very good pal of mine who knows way more about comic books than I do, where we pick a run and we just want people to get into it. It's basically like a recommendation machine, an analysis, what we're reading. It's really fun. I would love to have more listeners, so check that podcast out, and I hope you will discover something new by doing so. Thanks for watching.